philosophical issues or worldview, which is, I think, it's not law issue, it's belief issue.
I sent philosophical questions, and one of these philosophical questions is why. And Maqasid is all about why. Why, like, why it is happening. And this lead the dawah or lead the receiver to find a dimension for what we are teaching. You get it. And I'm not talking about you think what I mean by to enter Islamic kalam, I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about the the the, the right of the people to know why and how. But in Maqasid, especially in Maqasid, like there is a very nice example of Dr. Joseph before I'm quoting from him about your daughter beside him in the car, and he stopped. Said, why you stop? Because it's right. Why you stop? Because this is the law. They said, till you reach to understand why. So these things, I'm not talking about deep philosophy, but the philosophical question which even your kids can ask. But what we are usually to do, to shut up them and this, how it is. And it is cannot work these days. You have to have answers, except to the things which are constant in Islam, which why 5 prayers. This we take it as Prophet Muhammad has happened and what Quran told us. But any other things we can explain about. Ilm al-Maqasid is methodology, is a method that you can use it to reach the objectives of the Quran, the objective of why we are doing this, why we are not doing this. For example, when I approach this to, the matter of social relation between boys and girls, and when we take it slowly with anybody, and we find the result, what happened in the society, and the problems happening in the society. So, maqasid of this, to protect the family, protect the generation, so it becomes very effective in our way of now. Like some other questions, it is, needs really another dimension. Like when I say I'm free, I want to be gay. This is my body. Huh? This is what happens to us nowadays. This we need really prepare ourselves to face this because it's coming and it will be by the law. And even people in the West reject it now, at the end they will accept. And many families now I know in the Western, they don't know it. But at the end it will be normalized, this like what happened before. I don't know, I answered the question already.
So what I understood was somehow the maqasid, even though it focuses on law, it answers philosophical questions like why.
Yeah, and Dr. Jessup can correct me.
Okay, sure.
He will explain more.
Thank you, then. Jazakallah. I have a last question po. How can we measure success?
Okay. You see, uh, success, you have to know what is success, what is your goal, right? When you have a goal for something and you reach it, it's success. Like we are talking about success as general in our life. How you say this person is successful? So the big definition of success. You know, you can enter the exam and succeed. So you pass the exam, bravo. But the bigger vision in your life. So this guy is rich, oh, he's successful. It is the truth. You know, so any success in life, there is no God in Allah is not there, it's not success. You know, uh, I had a conversation with some because we are live now. I don't want to mention him, famous person in Philippines, and he converted us. And when he was not Muslim, he always under the drugs, always. He told me, and he's very rich and very successful. Successful. So I told him, why? I want to ask you why. You are very successful and rich, and why you are taking drugs? He said, because simply I thought this success, material success, I thought it is happiness, and I never feel happy. And he explained details. So we are buying fake happiness by drug. At the start to have drugs, and then when we wake up, I know that oh, no happiness. Again, drugs, and his life become like this. So the success, and this is not Muslim, and he cannot feel happy. So people look for happiness, and and they don't know that happiness is not a destination; it is way of life. So success at the end, it will be what you input, and you are happy because Allah is there. Because without Allah means materials only. So I asked one rich guy, what you did to Allah? He said, I am making Hajj every year. This is not for Allah, it's for yourself. But is Allah let you happy, let you rich to make Hajj every year? Or to use this for something else? To let the people, to give jobs, to let the people happy, to let, helping the people. So I believe that success as a general, it should be uh, implement material in the life, sure, but without the dimension of the spiritual and Allah together, balanced together, no success. It will be trapped. And it is depends on everybody what he wants. Because there is a small goals, you can succeed in it, but it must serve something bigger.
Assalamualaikum, sir. Senior. This is my, this is not a question. This is I have, I want to have advice from you. As a youth, from Sulu, particularly Sulu, in what we introduce the Makasya Sharia, because it's difficult to us to forget the Makasya Sharia. So this make my, if you would like to advise us in one way that we can easily propagate the Makasya Sharia to the youth. That is,
Of course, this professor can answer, but I can tell you no. Maqasid, the lectures of Dr. Shasser, is for the scholars, you know. But you can simplify the meaning of maqasid in daily life very simple. And there is even book for Dr. Jasser is maqasid for beginners, something very simple, and everybody can understand, you know. And this can be done when you learn the source of this maqasid, the science of maqasid, the methodology of maqasid, and then we will start to simplify for the people in their life. This will be our job, inshallah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Um, I think there are no more questions. We will now present the certificate of appreciation, like the voting only. Institute of Islamic Studies, University of the Philippines presents the certificate of appreciation to Engineer Samuel Azwazuni for his invaluable contributions, guest speaker, lecture workshop on developing of methodology and Islamic studies. Given this 11 day timeline, 1000 feet, the Institute of Islamic Studies, University of the Philippines didn't sign Professor 251 D. Thank you so much once again, Sir Sam. We'll now proceed another important lecture on contemporary Islamic studies, Sharia and Percussion control. Many of you who attended last year's time lecture probably already know our lecturer, but let me introduce to you once again. His latest contribution is a new Makassi methodology that aims to reconstruct Islamic scholarship around the context network of the higher objectives or Makassi of the Quran and prophetic traditions. He is the president of the Makassi Institute Global, a think tank registered in building research educational projects in a number of countries. He is a Deputy Chair for Makassi Studies at the International Peace University in South Africa, a founding and board member of the International Union for Muslim Scholars, an executive member of the Big Council of North America, a member of the Union Council for Fatwa in Research, and the chairman of Canadian Big Council. He has a PhD in philosophy of Islamic law from the University of Wales, UK, and a PhD in systems analysis from the University of Waterloo, Canada. He lectured on Islam and its law in dozens of countries and wrote 25 books in Arabic and English, some of which were translated into 25 languages. To give us a lecture on contemporary Islamic studies, Sharia, and West methodology, let's welcome Dr. Jasser.
السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أسعد خلقه خاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. رضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار والعام بإحسان إلى يوم ثم اليوم. It's an honor to be here to speak to you. This major university in East Asia, and of course in the Philippines, the National University of the Philippines. I would like to start by thanking everybody who facilitated this. Jazakallah khair, Professor Wadi, and our friendship that started online and our intellectual discussion. Alhamdulillah, we got the chance to be here and see you, of course, my dear brother, Engineer Osama, and again, our brotherhood and friendship, and our sisters, Enduring Hard, and everybody, and of course, my brother and uh, the person I depend on in a lot of what the Qasid Institute does, Uzay, President Jizallah Khair. And so thank you all for making this a reality. And allow me to give a lecture on methodology and to be quote unquote theoretical. I don't uh, agree with the Aristotelian division between theory and practice. And it's not to me an Islamic idea, because Islam doesn't do theory and practice. Islam does ilm and amal. Ilm as in knowledge, and amal, just flipping the meme and the lam, has to do with the translation of knowledge into action. So knowledge and action. And therefore, knowledge in Islam is not theory. Knowledge is amal. Part of your amal would be knowledge. Part of your work for the sake of Islam. Anyway, that aside, allow me to give a theoretical lecture that has to do with the theory of the Maqasid methodology, what we're trying to produce in terms of thought in this stage of the life of our Ummah. What we need to do is to work on ideas and al-ilm, as I mentioned. And ideas or al-ilm is at the core of any change that we can ever make. Some people have issues with the ideas because they look at the utility, the manifestation of the ideas into the practical reality. But ideas are the foundation of civilizations and the foundation of states. There is no state without an idea, and there is no civilization without an idea, and there is no university without an idea. And there is nothing really that pushes the humanity forward, whether in terms of technology and tools or in terms of social structures, unless it depends on a foundation of ideas. We have not been producing original ideas as Muslims for quite some time, because we have been mostly apologizing for the current states and the current systems by generating ideas that could cling to the current system and give us some existence, but not replacing the original system with a different one, which is the mission of Islam. Islam came to change the face of Earth. We are within a nation-state political system, and therefore we look at ideas to Islamize the state, whether through an element in the constitution or a title that the head of state carries or any of that, and then we call it an Islamic state. But if you go to the Quran, and we talk mostly about the Quran today, states, or if you wish, al-hukm, governance, is not like that. Al-hukm has a certain paradigm of doing politics. If we speak the political language, from the legitimacy to the alternation of power or the change of power to the objectives of the governance, they are all actually different from the way current nation states work. And yes, there is some intersection in terms of the benefits and the elevation of harms and so on. But if you want to think from the Islamic perspective, in order to make a change, we have to look for original ideas. We take the capitalist economy, for example, as a framework, and therefore we approach it from within by envisioning new ideas in terms of apologizing for elements and leaving some other elements. And therefore we come up with Islamic banks and Islamic currencies and these kinds of things within the system. There is a difference between thinking of a new paradigm, or in the Quranic terms, if I may use, would be tasawwur, perceptualization, and changing these systems by force. The changing of the system by force is usually a matter of interests and so forth, and is not equal to envisioning a different idea of the system. The forces that shape our world will continue to shape our world. These are the sunan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the universal laws that will continue to shape the world based on whoever can achieve these laws. The Muslim Ummah is not going to be able to change the world and produce a different approach to life, or a different tasawwur, or contribute to civilization in a major way without working on an array of ideas that could form that civilization. And these ideas have to come from people who are soldiers for the sake of Allah, not necessarily in the military sense, but soldiers as in dedicated to this deen, because this deen is not going to make a change without a critical mass of believers with deep belief who are able to push the current systems towards something better. We started like that after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he left us with a group of people that were very special. And yes, some of them were hypocrites, but the special people were much stronger, I believe, than the hypocrites. And therefore, on their shoulders, we eventually had a civilization, a new way of life. And yes, some of the hypocrites might have taken some government positions, but these were not the identity of the Ummah. The identity of the Ummah was defined by the most excellent of the companions that the Prophet left, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And therefore, you introduced new ideas, a new paradigm. We could look back now and judge these paradigms from our perspective and our worldview, but this would not be the right approach of assessing the major change that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did with this message of Islam. We could look back, for example, through a secular lens and look at Islam as a religion that came with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and therefore judge what he did in a religious manner, in a religious way. But Islam is not a religion, and the religia, the Latin religion is not the Islamic concept of deen. Deen is different. Muhammad came with the deen, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the deen of Islam is not the deen of Muhammad. The deen of Islam is the deen of Adam and Nuh and Musa and Isa. And Isa was a Muslim prophet. Every Muslim believes. Yes, some people after him, they disbelieved and therefore worshipped him and worshipped his mother. As Muslims, we believe in that. And therefore, Christianity took a religious form. Now that's a religion. Islam is not like that. Islam was a way of life. But after the prophets, the generation that comes after, they face a crossroad of whether they continue with the message of Islam or they change. And eventually all of them change because that's the nature of humanity. And therefore, a prophet after prophet comes. Prophet Musa, by the end of his life, they already changed and they worship the golden cow. And eventually, there are people who came to renew. So basically, what I'm saying is that we need to think about Islam as a deen and think about the ilm or the world of ideas or the world of knowledge as a necessary foundation for the establishment of that deen. That deen is not going to work with practical solutions for problems that did not belong to Islam, that were caused by paradigms other than the Islamic paradigm. And yes, we could work obviously in parallel lines and therefore feed the hungry and try to alleviate the suffering of the people and deal with courts and civil society, etc. But Islam is not here to put band-aids on other civilizations' problems, but to re-envision civilization in a different way. And therefore, it could deal with the problems of Mecca of the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and therefore alleviate the suffering of somebody who is treated unfairly or free a slave or these kinds of things. But Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to Mecca not to just do some partial work for the society, but rather to change the world, to change the system. And those who are smart enough from Quraysh who knew that decided to kill him because they knew that he is bringing a different world. And he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, eventually migrated to Medina and was able to find a different base for what he was trying to do. And with those 70 Ansar and 80 or 120 or so Muhajirin, eventually in 20 years, he made a very different world. Now, this humble book of mine has to do with re-envisioning Islamic scholarship from that perspective, from the perspective of the scholarship, for lack of a better word in English, being the manifestation of what we could call ilm in Islam. And I did not use the word jurisprudence because Islam is not only jurisprudence. Islam is much wider than that. And fiqh is not jurisprudence. Fiqh yafqahu, we go to the Quran, is a deep understanding. Part of it is to understand the law, but the majority of it has nothing to do with the law. And Shari'ah is not fiqh. Fiqh is the human understanding of the Sharia. And the Sharia, in that sense, is a wider system of life, of a road, a way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, كُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شَرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. The Sharia would be that way, and the minhaj would be, if you wish, the landmarks on the way, the signs that define the way. And that could be a translation in English by the word methodology. That's why we call it manhaj in Arabic. Manhaj is nahj, is a clear road, but that clear road has signs on it, so we can continue on it. And the maqasid in that sense is the question of why, as my brothers mentioned, and the purpose, objectives, and so forth. But we're taking the maqasid to a different level, putting it in the heart of logic. And let me start by logic, actually, because I believe that our re-envisioning cannot start without talking about logic. I decided to read from the book with you, flip through it, perhaps to give an introduction. so that if you would like to read it more. And again, I am noting that this is a lecture on methodology and speaking in a university to students and professors and so on, because this is the area that I specialize in. And some people could be better than me in speaking about other issues in the practical world. I believe we have to make a shift in our logic as Muslims and in humanity in general. But as Muslims, we have to carry the flag of this, from causality to teleology, to speak in Latin, or basically in Arabic, from al-asbab wal-ilal to al-maqasid wal-ghayat. What is that? It has to do with the way we look at events, whether the events are personal or collective, or whether they are even ahkam or rules, not just for jurisprudence, but any rules. In the fiqhi mind, in the wider sense that we have so far, we think about illah, what we call illah or sabab. And that is the dominant theme in the theory of fiqh that we call usul al-fiqh. And in the theory of what we call aqidah, or we'll talk about that or kalam. The ilal has to do with something from the past that is influencing my present. The ghaya or the maqsid is something to do in the future that is pulling the present towards it. And there is a huge difference between understanding the reality by looking at the past versus understanding the reality by looking at the future. If you understand the reality by looking at the past, then you are squarely in the causality paradigm in terms of thought and logic. And you are going to think about today based on yesterday. Think, how did we arrive to today? And therefore you get into all sorts of tafsir or interpretation of what we have today based on the past. But if you think about today based on the future, it doesn't mean to ignore the past. It's not a black and white approach. But I'm just saying, in the dimension of looking at the future, you're actually thinking about something that could pull your reality towards it. So, what do I want to achieve in the future is what the Quran is here to teach us. I do not believe that the Quran is focusing on al-asbab or al-ilal. I do not believe that al-ta'lil or al-sababiyya is a Quranic method. Yes, it manifests in some parts of the Quran. Allah is saying that He brought the water and therefore, because of it, He produced plants and the clouds gather and therefore the rain. But this is a minority of the logic of the Quran. The logic of the Quran is not causal. The logic of the Quran is purpose-based, is objective-based. He created us to worship Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yes, He's talking about the causes, but they are not as important as worshiping Him. And He's talking about the causes in a way that has a purpose and not necessarily giving us information about how we are here. So, يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها. O people, be heedful of Allah, of your Lord, who created you from one soul and created from her mate, and He spread from them. So He is talking about this one soul from which He created Adam and Hawa. And that one soul, you could understand that it is the ground. Allah anbatakum min al-ardi nabata. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised you from the ground like plants. So if you want to think about asbab or sababiyat, you are going to get into the area in the Quran that could bear different interpretations. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it does not have a purpose to give us the asbab in a very detailed way. He does not have a purpose for us to understand exactly the Adam and Hawa issue. And of course, the rib and this is Israeliyat. It's not correct hadith anyway. However famous they are. Just forget about that. But if you look at the Quran and the nafs wahid and so on, but if you look at why we are created, which is the maqsad, you will find it very strong and very clear that we are created to worship Allah. And we are created to have ibtila, or the test, or the trials. And the trials are good and evil. And good, you have to thank. And evil, you have to be patient. الصبر والشكر. And والتقوى للعبادة والعبادة للشكر والشكر. You will start to have a sequence of objectives that is going to shape where you head. Allah created the mountains. He did not tell us whether the tectonics work this way or that way, because the tectonics is a theory anyway, and it is changing these days. If you read the latest from University of Toronto, where the theory emerged, they are changing the theory of tectonics into a different theory. The sababiyat are theories. The asbab are theories. And theories, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left them open so that we develop scientifically, generation after generation. But He gave us the final purpose, and that doesn't develop. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He put the mountains on earth and so that it balances earth. It doesn't go unbalanced. That is the purpose of the mountain. He put the cattle on the ground for us to have meat and milk and their hides and this and that. How did they start on the ground is the aspect, is the theory. Some people talk about some sort of an evolution, and that is a theory of how the animals develop. Some people talk about an abrupt start of these animals, especially the cattle, that started 15 or 13,000 years ago or something. Because before that, we don't have any fossils of any cattle, for example. And some people have theories of how the cattle started on Earth. That is science. But what is not science, what is the Quran telling us, is that these are on Earth for certain reasons. وَأَنزَلَ لَكُم مِّنَ الْأَنْعَامِ ثَمَانِيَةَ أَزْوَاجٍ. We put down for you 8 pairs of animals. Put down through whatever, from the ground or from the heavens or from other species. This is science. But He put that for us for purpose. When He talks, subhanahu wa ta'ala, about the social structures, He is not, or the Quran is not busy with the ilal and the asbab as much as it is busy with the purposes. So if you look at the fiqh of marriage, for example, you will find that there is al-asbab wal-shurut wal-mawani'. The scholars thought in terms of the reasons or the causes and the conditions and the obstacles, and mawani' or the hindrances. And al-asbab wal-shurut wal-mawani' is a logical way of thinking about marriage that has to do with the correctness of a contract. That is not the objective of the law or the objective of marriage. He subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us marriage for the sake of tranquility and love and mercy and family relations. لتسكنوا إليها خلق لكم من آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها. So He, amongst His signs, that He is giving you mates so that you find tranquility in them. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. He made between you love and mercy. Therefore, family or marriage, to use the Quranic term, or zawaj, is not about the shurut wal mani'. Of course, we all have to go according to these rules, but this is not the point of that institution. That institution the reason of it is the purpose of it, not the asbab or shurut wal mawani, the hindrances and so forth. And therefore, if you look at the fiqh of marriage in the Quran, we'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow, inshallah, in the workshop. And in terms of the objectives, you will produce a different fiqh from the fiqh that looks at it in terms of reasons and causes. And therefore, you will have a different law and you will have a different policy as a state or law as a legislative body. And you will have a different community and society as individuals, males and females, because we are thinking about this institution in terms of its purposes, not in terms of the causes that led to the correctness of some culture. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about war and peace, for another example, He is not talking about the causes as much as the whys of the war and peace. ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم وبعض لهدمت صوامع وبيع لفسدت الأرض. Allah is saying, had people not been pushing each other as, people of the truth pushing the people of the falsehood, and then the people of the falsehood push back, and they rule, and then the people of the truth push back. So had not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this mutual pushing, tadafa, between people, earth would have been a corrupted place. Earth would not have been the place we have today. Because yes, most of the time it's evil people who overwhelm the good people. But the times when the good people push back are the times of creating good on earth. Not just in societies, but even in nature. When people push back and you have short periods of justice and good governance and so on, that is when the environment renews itself and the animals and plants become stronger and more vibrant. When the time when the good people push the bad people is the time when earth sees goodness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to be on earth to do. And Allah has a wisdom subhanahu wa ta'ala that the majority of people are going to be corruptors. And it's only the minority that is going to be reformers or rectifiers. And because it is not about a majority, it is about an excellent minority that is trying to rectify. So when He subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He created something called war and peace, He has a purpose for it. And yes, there could be some asbab or ilal or ratio ligas kind of, if you want to think in terms of the Latin kind of way of looking at this. But this is not the reason why we have war and peace. We have war and peace because of certain purposes at the end. And so forth. So if you look at the Quran, you will find that the main purpose, the main logic, of the Quran is the logic of purposes and not the logic of causes and effects. And this shift I find necessary for Muslims to contribute something meaningful today. They have to think in terms of the purposes. Now, let me cover this first title in the introduction. It has to do with connectivity, holism, and emergence. We cannot think about purposes without thinking about connections. It is not possible to think about the purposes of family without looking at the connections of each member of the family with each other. Because without connecting the husband, wife, and children, and as Allah said in the Quran, the relatives from the father's side and from the mother's side, and the grandchildren and the grandparents, it is not possible to think about the system of family and its purposes without connecting the family. And severing these connections, as Allah mentioned in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, corrupting earth is by severing this. It's not possible to think about the purposes of nature without connecting nature. If you look at the tree for wood,
and the land for meat, and the fish for oil, and so forth, and you sever the connections between the elements of nature, you are not going to be able to deal with nature in an Islamic way. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to look at nature in a different philosophy, in a different paradigm. He said, for example, that animals and birds are nations like us. And therefore, they do have all the connections we have as nations, as communities, as ummah. And therefore, they have languages that by which they can communicate, and they can communicate even interspecies, and they have families or marriage in their own way, and they have children, and they have neighborhoods, and they have tribes and conflicts and everything that we have as an ummah. And therefore, it is not possible to deal with nature in a way that is Islamic through the paradigm of environmental rights and so on, that is the product of a different path, a different civilizational path. The environmental rights are great in terms of, I live in the West, secular societies. It's great that they have this, and we Muslims should contribute to that. But we are, as Muslims, we're not going to be able to come up with new ideas and useful ideas for nature through the environmental rights paradigm. We have to understand the environment through our lens of defining things. Does the Quran have environment? Of course, from the beginning to the end. Does the Quran have political science from the beginning to the end, and economics from the beginning to the end, and engineering from the beginning to the end? But it's how you read it. It's how you read it. So if you're going to look at connectivity here, it is essential that we connect between the elements in the Quran that talks about what we are studying, and it is essential to connect the elements in the reality that is directly related to our studies. So if I want to study poverty as a phenomenon, for example, or I want to study racism or any of these phenomena, when I study poverty as a phenomenon, I have to connect everything in the Quran, not just the word faqr and the word ghina. It's not a linguistic exercise, but it is a purpose exercise. Everything in the Quran that has a purpose of alleviating poverty. And I find that from the beginning to the end, everything in Islam is contributing one way or the other to alleviating poverty. And when I deal with poverty on the ground, I cannot deal with it as an economic phenomenon, because poverty is not an economic phenomenon only. Poverty is a political phenomenon to start with, and a psychological phenomenon, and a cultural phenomenon. And poverty as a phenomenon cannot be boxed in, the GDPs and stuff like this. No, this is a different paradigm that is not going to solve poverty, in my perspective. It's going to enforce poverty, because the purposes of these paradigms is to enforce poverty, not to solve poverty. So therefore, we have to look at poverty, for example, as a phenomenon by connecting what's in the Quran in order to come up with a theory or a nazariya, if you want to speak Arabic, or mabadi or usul, if you want to use the Quranic languages. And you have to connect the sub-phenomena in the reality that is going to allow you to reach from connectivity to holism, which is the second word I talked about. Holism, in that sense, is a look at a phenomena or looking at the Quran as a whole by connecting many elements. And therefore, the whole emerges from the parts. The Quran calls it insha. Insha. Look at what Allah ansha'akum. The insha of the human being, for example, in the Quran, is about going through certain phases. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us from dust and then from mud and so on. And He put all our parts. And therefore, we as humans, we emerged. We came out as a new creature. That insha is the Quranic word of
what we call in English, again, like a better word, emergence this way. Something emerges, something comes out. Another word is tawallud in the Quran that has to do with giving birth to something. And that is part of the Quranic logic. So I said I'm starting with a logical introduction. So basically, emergence is the giving birth of new ideas or new paradigms, as my brother mentioned, or a new way of looking at the reality so that we can shift the reality to what we want as a purpose. Connectivity, holism, and emergence has something to do with logic. And logic in the Quran is the word mantiq. In fact, mantiq is wider than logic. The word logic, if you look at it in the Greek or Latin way, has to do with a machine that systemizes your thinking. So you say that A implies B and B implies C, therefore A implies C. Like there are rules of thinking. Al-mantiq in Islam is not rules of thinking. Al-mantiq is rules of talking. نطق ينطق منطقا. The mantiq is to talk, which means to relate the signs to truths. And al-mantiq in Islam is to look at the signs, and from the signs you reach the truth. And that truth you are going to express in words. That these words are signs. So if I'm speaking to you in a particular language, and that translates into certain truths in your mind about what I'm trying to say. This is, as I am uttering the words or doing this nutq of the words, they are forming particular patterns in your mind. That's why Sulaiman said, we learned not the logic of the birds, but the speech of the birds. Nature doesn't speak, but nature has signs that we can see and therefore come up with the truths. And this is the language of nature. And that is the definition of mantiq in the Quran. The definition of mantiq has to do with observing the nature and from that coming up with truths. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us in the Quran a lot of this. What he calls ayat subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the signs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the ayat in the Quran so that when we read them, they guide us to truth. They might not go with the machine that we think in terms of logic, but they are truths in their own right. You see that the logical machines ended up in today's world in basically what people describe as objective realities, which has to do with objectivity. Like you look at something and you say that I can prove that, and that becomes an objective reality. If I can prove it, how can I prove it? I can prove it by seeing it, hearing it, smelling it, touching it. The five senses. The Quran, in terms of its logic, does not go by objective reality. Truth is not equal to objective reality. The Quran itself is not an objective reality. The Quran, an angel came to Muhammad with a message. And therefore Muhammad received the revelation, and the revelation is the truth in that sense. In fact, this revelation is the foundation of our knowledge. But the angel is not an objective reality. The angel cannot be proven in the five senses. And we cannot really have a lab experiment that proves angels. Yeah, some people are saying, there are certain waves and they're trying to, do some da'wah with that. But fundamentally, angels are not an objective reality, which is the source of our knowledge anyway. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that the truth is not necessarily tied to material evidence. In fact, the truth is ultimately a non-material evidence. And you find it in the Quran. Therefore, the signs or the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leading you to the truth, that translation of the ayat into a truth with the mantiq or the logic of the Quran or the speech of the Quran is not a material translation. It's not the way we look at things in our current civilization today. And these shifts are not just theories, by the way. I view them as important for what we are trying to do as Muslims in our civilization. Now, the shift from causality to the maqasid thinking or the future based thinking will make you future oriented to start with, this future orientation section that you have here. Because when I think about ibadah as my purpose of being on earth, I'm thinking about a future thing I'm trying to do. Taqwa for fasting. So I'm fasting and I have a future objective of achieving taqwa. This future always is the mindset when you think in terms of maqasid versus the past. And when you think in terms of the maqasid, you are critical by definition. The question of why that we mentioned, why am I fasting? Then I'm critical of my fasting. If the fasting achieves taqwa, then it is on the right path. If the fasting does not achieve taqwa, then it is not good fasting. The Prophet ﷺ told the man, if you don't stop living falsehood and saying falsehood, there is no need for you to stop eating food and drink. So why? Because the taqwa is the objective of the fasting. I'm critical of this stuff. Now, what is the objective of governance? What is the objective of knowledge? What is the objective of education? What is the objective of family? What is the objective of a neighborhood? And the Quran, therefore, will allow us to be critical about everything we do, because once we know the objective of governance, we can differentiate between bad governance and good governance. And whether the governor is a Muslim or non-Muslim, or this could be an issue, but basically, you are going to differentiate based on the objective of governance. You are going to differentiate between successful families or marriages and failure marriages based on the objective of marriage. If it is about love and mercy and tranquility and relatives, relations, then it is successful. If it is about the opposite of these things, then it is a failure. And therefore, the objective will allow us to be critical. And we do need to be critical because we do not ask too many critical questions as Muslims, and we take things from the authorities, religious or otherwise, without asking why, and therefore able to critique what the authorities are feeding us in terms of information. Thirdly, the maqasid is a comprehensive orientation. So a purposeful or a future orientation, a critical orientation, and a comprehensive orientation. Because once you ask why, and once you look at the higher level thinking of at-taqwa, al-ibadah, wal-shukr, wal-birr, and so forth, you are looking at the bigger system. You are looking at the connections and the whole, and therefore the whole is going to be your focus rather than the parts. And we have a major, again, logical problem of focusing on partialistic thinking versus the holistic thinking, and dividing Islam into so much fragments that have no holistic picture. People think that in Islam, they have to do 1 to 3, 4, 100, but they don't link 1 to 2 to 3 to 5. Like what is important, what is less, what is big, what is under what. No, it's just a bag of things. And this bag of cans, if you do it, we are very fragmented. We think about the Quran in a fragmented way. We read an ayah by an ayah, or we do hifz when we were kids and we used to do hifz. Our Shaykh never linked the ayat together, never told us why this is Samir and Ali, and this is Aziz al-Hakim, this is Ghafur Rahim. Like he never connected, he never, Allah yarhamu, great Shaykh, but like basically we fragment a lot. And comprehensive orientation is necessary because the fragmentation means the hegemony of injustice and disbelief and evil. fragmentation إن فرعون علا في الأرض وجعل أهلها شيعا يستضعف طائفة منهم. Pharaoh, Allah said in the Quran, raised himself in the land by fragmenting his people. So divide and conquer, the British said. So basically, this divide and conquer is not just in states and tribes and nations. It is in institutions, in families, in societies, in education, in psychology, and in medicine. If you look at the human as a heart, and you have a heart problem, you go to the heart doctor, and then the eye doctor, and then this. And no, there is a doctor for this part and a doctor for this part. And fine, specialization is important. But specialization, if it becomes fragmentation, then you have a failed medicine. You have a medicine that is dealing with my finger and healing my finger, but causing my eye to have a problem. And then they start to heal the eye, and then the shoulder, and then this, and then that. And that is textbook what we have today in contemporary medicine. We fragmented the humanity, and it's important to specialize, but we don't integrate the specialization. People who are specialized in part of your stomach don't know even anything about the other part of your stomach. And they tell you, no, I can't, I'm specialized in this. And people, on the other hand, who are holistic medicine, are not as successful in treating particular issues. Because the bigger paradigm is a cause and effect paradigm, is a paradigm of give me this medicine for this so that it goes away. But it's going to cause me allergy. But yeah, now can be with it's not as successful, but it is giving us some solutions for particular problems. But we are not able to be comprehensive. And I believe that Islamic medicine, which stopped at Ibn Rushd and so on, the Islamic approach to medicine, stopped at the medical fantastic doctors of Khartaj and in India and in Africa. They left us great books and great approaches to the human being. And when you look at, for example, the design of hospitals, the hospitals were not divided between psychological and material, and this is a hospital only for the heart, and this. The hospital was a holistic institution. And therefore, they tell you, well, yes, you came with a problem with your stomach, but you also have to see green, and you have to eat well, and you have to drink good water, and so on. So when you look at the design of the hospitals in our civilization, it's the latest that we have, was actually quite holistic and integrative, and integrating the psychological issues with the material issues. Now, in order to resume this journey and to build on the achievements that Western medicine, as well as Chinese medicine and other heritages have achieved, we do need to look at the comprehensive orientation of humans and doctors, Muslim doctors, who are trying to look at an Islamic definition of medicine based on the guidance of the Quran, will have to think in a different way. I will skip the limitations of contemporary approaches. I mentioned a lot of them. I basically said that imitation or taqleed is one of the major problems we have, including in maqasid studies, partialism or tajzeel, apologism or tabrir, basically contradiction or tanaqud, deconstruction of the fiqh. When you look at these, as some of the hurdles we have in Islamic scholarship, this is a chapter that deals with that. The third chapter, how long do I have? Until yeah. So I'll keep something. Yes. For us. Okay, for us. If you look at chapter 3, and I want to stop if you have any question or any part, please, perhaps. Yeah, please, close the conversation.
Well, we simply raise questions. One is So you could take some rest. And, I know it's quite difficult to be talking, integrating all the thoughts and making all the reflections. So we're very happy that you touched on these important issues from your uh, conceptions of ideas to the way reality should be viewed in terms of the division in causality and uh, ideology or what you refer to as capacity and how we understand the logic of the Quran, including the need for shape and the evolutions of capacity as a whole or as a system into this in terms of its nature. I'm just reflecting, for instance, your this above what your positions that which achieving praxis. Um, Indeed, the Islamic view is that knowledge and mistake, knowledge should be part of this religion. But for a very long time, vision with the so-called ideas and categories that lose track of its being, say, in terms of Plato and Aristotle. And at times, this division doesn't reflected uh, among the philosophers, Muslim philosophers. Some were Aristotelian, some were Platonic or Neoplatonic. Uh, the division was so intense that some say that in the rise of the lights of Al-Ghazali to be able to critique both the Aristotelians, the Platonist scholars, in terms of bringing back the idea of knowledge as holistic. On the contrary, we could also view the fact that that trend in the rise of the philosophers could be viewed as their way, could be viewed as their way in terms of understanding the debate of the discourse today. When the influence of the debate was so immense at that time. So they stood up and tried to examine what's there in Greek philosophy. At times influencing them somehow. Then Al-Ghazali came and deconstructed the whole thing and it will be, as you mentioned, holistic understanding of will. So that after that, the discourse was not as vivid as during the time of the philosophy. Some would say probably maybe Al-Ghazali had gone quite far in terms of making the critique, say, against Ibn Rus, as you know. And Ibn Rus became popular in the Latin world, leading to some extent, the rise of modern science. In other words, there were implications in the rather harsh or strong critique of Al-Ghazali on the early philosophers, either the Neoplatonics or the Aristotelian. And we have not seen the same vivid expression of the debate succeeding years after that, except more to some extent that the rise of the contradictions among the Shiites, and to some extent is going on until the modern times. And some would say that because of the strong critique of Al-Ghazali, then a kind of a golden age of Islamic law, has come. But I was just talking about the implications of um, the dual nature of knowledge, looking at it as we say in terms of theory or in terms of practice. The other part
Dr. Zawda, is your divisions of methods in terms of looking at reality, causality, teleology, or types of progress. Are they really separate? Are they not, in a sense, some kind of a mirror image of another? For instance, if the Quran speaks of mawadda in rahmah, love and mercy, there is of the union as the end of the union with a woman and a husband and wife. Isn't it that other communities, other non-Muslims, could also reach that kind of, kind of the happiness of mawadda in rahmah? All the rituals are maybe different. To suggest that the ritual, the process, the causality process, in at least in my impression, is must be viewed as important as the purpose. And rather than to look at causality as insignificant, if only to highlight the importance of maqasid or purpose. In other words, what provides identity, you would say, in a Muslim in a husband and wife? Is it the purpose or is it the rituals that they engage in? An atheist, for instance, would experience the same mawadda in rahmah, even if they do not undergo the same process of Islamic marriage, right? So therefore, the process, the causality you're referring to, in a sense, are also relevant. That's one impression. But I think your presentation is quite comprehensive. I just want to talk about those two on these two things. Thank you.
Like a fair enough. Love this. Love this. Just a couple of comments on what you said. In terms of the Aristotelian and Platonic or Neoplatonic shift that happened to our scholars, I think as a civilization, we lost a lot by the blunder of the Mu'tazili when they decided to persecute the people who do not believe in the Mu'tazili thinking. And therefore, the next Khalifa who was against them persecuted them and was able to basically terminate the Mu'tazili heritage of the Ummah. And we ended up, from my perspective, falling from that point, from the point of the Abbasid Khalifas that started to persecute the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila is the genuine thinking in Islam versus the scholars that you mentioned that are simply Aristotelian or Platonic, because they think in terms of the same paradigm. And therefore, their chemistry stopped at the same paradigm, and even the arts that they produced were not as good as the scholars who took a Mu'tazili kind of approach. So, but the Mu'tazila committed suicide politically, therefore they were gone. But what is left from the Mu'tazila had benefited us as Muslims. I classify Ibn Khaldun really as largely Mu'tazili, and therefore he was able to imagine a different classification of knowledge and therefore a different educational system during his time in the Tunisia of the time, because he decided not to classify knowledge Aristotle as the others did. Ibn Hazm, I also consider him to be largely Mu'tazili, despite the fact that his fiqh was literal. And Ibn Hazm was a product of the Andalusia of the time as a civilization. I see a direct link between the high philosophy of Ibn Hazm and his critique of Aristotle is very strong and very interesting as well. interesting philosophy. But in terms of the practical reality, Ibn Hazm represents Andalusia with all of its complication and all of its focus on particular parts of Islam as fixed, and the rest to be open to thinking and so forth. So his literalism is actually a way of opening the Islamic system to new ideas. And because he said, well, we're just gonna go by these rules that are very clear in the script. But he did not mean to stop thinking in the other parts of life. It was actually, in that sense, very beneficial. Ibn Taymiyyah, for another example, to me, despite what the Salafis might say, his critique of the Greek philosophy is very close to a neo-Mu'tazili kind of way of looking at it. And his impact on education and research until today is very obvious. They call him Shaykh al-Islam and so forth. Shatibi, who actually produced also the idea of maqasid in a major way, was pretty much Mu'tazili. Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, the current Sheikh of al-Azhar, has a paper that I used to teach when I was teaching a course on maqasid regularly. It's a paper on al-usul al-kalamiyya al-Shatibi. Where is Shatibi in terms of kalam? And he comes up with the idea that Shatibi is actually Mu'tazili, or very close to. And one of the good productions of Sheikh al-Tayyib. So these things to me are not just a pure research in history, but I believe that these ideas have an impact on the civilization. There is a huge difference between the Mu'tazilis of the time when they thought about Bayt al-Hikmah and approached knowledge in a particular way. Al-Jahid, for example, would not have produced what he produced if he was not a Mu'tazili. And Al-Jahid, because of what he produced based on his Qiyam, he also wrote about Nazm al-Quran. He's the first person to write about Nazm al-Quran. There is a link between a holistic approach to the Quran and a holistic approach to knowledge. And the Mu'tazili as in the free will of the humans, and but the Mu'tazili were against Bani Umayyah at the beginning, and eventually they did all the blunders, and therefore I believe we lost a lot of history. Perhaps this is my comment on the first point. The second point, I do agree with you. I'm not canceling the causes or the conditions in a contract. These are very important. But unfortunately, we have defined the marriage in terms of the marriage contract, for example. And therefore, we lost a lot of the social issues because we are teaching our kids that marriage is a contract and full stop, and rights and responsibility. So when I get into some of the problems of our sons and daughters in Islam, general sons and daughters, I get into some of their problems. They argue with each other as if they're standing in a court. They define their problems because, like, it's my right and your right, and who does that? And they want very specific rules for everything because they don't look at the final purpose. They enter into marriage as a contract, my rights and your rights and this piece of the pie. But they don't look at the wider purpose, and therefore they cannot sustain a marriage, because I believe that this institution has to be built on a degree of huge tolerance and giving up some of the rights of both people in order for it to float, for the boat to float. But because they enter this system only with a contract mind, they lose a lot. And as communities as well, I mean, we are turning into a community that goes by the law. And everything that is legal we respect, but otherwise it's not really our obligation. So it's not a legal obligation. And Islam, the moral system, Islam is not a legal system. The legal system is the basic morality of the societal situation. whatever the majority decides anyway. but it doesn't define the cohesion of the society. And therefore, we are divided as an ummah because of the legal thinking into all of these, Sunnah, Shia, Shafi'iyah, Ahnaf, and all of this history. And we are dividing ourselves based on lines that do not exist anymore. And schools have no impact on our lives anyway. But we fight each other over these things, identity fights. So that's also another. So I agree with you, sir, that the causes and the purposes are two sides of the same coin, and they are mirrors. But I'm trying to focus on the purposes because I see that without the purposes of the law and the purposes of marriage and the purposes of the mosque and the purposes of the company and the purposes of whatever institution, we really cannot move forward and be creative and so forth. So let me resume. Any other comment, please? I will resume, inshallah, quickly. I know it's the end of the day. Inshallah. Chapter 3 in this book has to do with basically reorienting the Islamic worldview or the paradigm that my brothers talked about. And worldview and paradigm, and so on, are the English words of what we call in Arabic, what we could call a tasawwur. And we say in usul al-hukm ala al-shay'i far'an an tasawwuri. You cannot judge something unless you perceive it or have a perception of it. That perception is the Islamic worldview. Is the Islamic worldview different from other worldviews? Yes. Are there areas of intersection? Of course. We have areas of intersection with any other worldview, of any other human. But the Islamic worldview is a unique worldview, is singular, and has a very different definition of the reality. As I mentioned, the reality doesn't have to be objective in the French rationality kind of sense, but it is basically al-ghayb wa shahada, the witnessed world and the unwitnessed, or al-ghayb world. And al-ghayb is reality too, but it is ghayb. And tomorrow we could know some of al-ghayb and become shahada, becomes part of the witnessed world. And as we grow in knowledge, we transfer more of al-ghayb into shahada, the area of shahada. So we see more, we nashhad, we witness more stuff. Scholarship in Islam is applying knowledge to reality. And that reality, we want to focus on one primary point here, especially in the work of the Maqasid Institute, that this is not just the reality of the law. The definition of Islam as a law is a secular definition, is the definition that from the colonization that my brothers talked about. The colonization decided to rule the Muslim world. Not a single city of the Muslim world did not see colonization or occupation. In order to rule, you have to cut the people from their worldview and shift them to your worldview as an occupier. And the colonial worldview is a secular worldview, separates what they call the state and the church, or in some extreme forms like the French, they want to separate the religion from life. They don't want religion to be anywhere public. You could, wear your hijab at your home, but don't wear it in the street. That's what they want eventually. That paradigm it has caused quite a problem because colonization wanted to shrink Islam from a deen, from a way of life, into a religion or a confession, something that eventually you go to the mosque and practice, but you do not practice in the economy. The economy is going to be riba. And therefore, we have riba economies everywhere now, based on the banks and the interests and the generation of money and these kinds of, the fiat money. So, the social system is not going to be Islamic. And therefore, you are going to have healthcare as an industry, not as a right of the people to speak the modern language. But it was not a right at that time, it was given, it was a haq, a truth. And therefore, you have a system in which the poor gets the same healthcare as the rich, because the system is not based on the economy of trading in sickness. Education was not a trade as well, was not a business, did not generate money. And therefore, yes, it generates from the teachers and from the doctors and from this, but the hospital is a waqf in that sense. That is a different system from the system that the colonization wanted to bring. And therefore, if you look at the hospitals that were awqaf in the Arab world, they were, eventually transformed into private hospitals, because that is what is going to serve the bigger system. The education was also based on mosques and so on, based on donations from people. People did not accumulate as much wealth. People accumulated wealth for their purposes, but then when they die, usually they give a will for 1/3 of the wealth to go for these institutions. And therefore, it is the will of the donor that produced the hospitals and the libraries and the madrasas and schools. And all of these were charities. That is a different system from all of these becoming part of capitalist economy. And therefore, Islam became irrelevant for these things. Universities became for the purpose of the serving of the market or the economy. And Islam retreated into theology. You want to study theology, you go to an Islamic college and study theology. But you don't study Islam, you study medicine or engineering or politics or economics or psychology or architecture or anything. You don't study that anymore. And we inherited that even post-colonial world, and we kept the same system. Even the major Muslim countries, the Islamic universities, they produce clergy, and the secular, for dunya, worldly, whatever you want to call them, universities, produce the other professions. And clergy is not the Islamic definition. Yes, we could have a faqih in the sense of the law, but this person does not have the authority of God or any of that. It's just the knowledge of a person that you ask for a teacher. But this is not the paradigm. And therefore, the result of the colonization is the change of the system from the deen being everything about life into the deen being faith, a system of faith only, because this is how they understand Christianity and Judaism. Judaism is more a nationality, not a religion, really. Because it could be Jew and atheist. This is just a nationality from their perspective, how they define their deen anyway. Christianity is more into, let us separate the religion into the church, and if you want religion, you can go to a mosque and so forth, and the state will protect that. But religion has nothing to do with policy making, basically, or governance, and so forth. And therefore, we ended up with a different paradigm of scholarship, because the Muslim scholar today is just a faqih, is the person who is trained in the jurisprudence. I am a member of the Union of Muslim Scholars Board, and we just had a debate, even just a few days ago. I mentioned my opinion on the media of the Board of Trustees, between scholars, without mentioning names, who believe that the Union of Muslim Scholars have to be only fuqaha in terms of Shari'ah knowledge, have to be only people who come from the Shafi'iyya or Malikiyya or Hanabila. and versus the minority, which I am part of, that believes that a Muslim scholar could be a biologist or a medical doctor, could be a philosopher or a journalist, but he's a Muslim scholar because he is dealing with political science from the Islamic perspective. The founders of the Union of Muslim Scholars, for example, Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi, one of the founders. Sheikh Rashid is a philosopher and a political scientist. He's not trained in in the fiqh, but apparently we're not supposed to consider him a scholar because he is not wearing amana. But this is not the issue. He is a political scientist and he is a scholar. You agree or disagree with some of his opinions, but at the end, he is a scholar of Islam. Dr. Zaghloul al-Najjar, for example, another example is a what's it called? Ulum al-Ard, earth sciences, his specialization. And he's a founding member of the Union. But apparently he's not supposed to be part of the scholars, even though, yes, he could agree or disagree with him, but he's trying to approach science from an Islamic perspective. Whoever, a number of them are lawyers, they study law. They do not study Shari'ah in the Islamic sense, but they study the legal system. Some of them are linguists. A number of our scholars who founded the Union of Muslim Scholars are actually linguists in the Arabic language, and there is a sister who's a linguist in the French language, but they're all Muslim scholars. So the point is that even at one of the major institutions of Islamic scholarships, people think that Islamic scholarships is only fiqh in the legal sense, and they don't accept a linguist in the Arabic language, for example, to be a Muslim scholar. Oh, that's an Arabist, and that's a historian. But history is also an Islamic science. And the Quran has history from cover to cover. And the Quran has political science from cover to cover. And the Quran has economics from cover to cover. And psychology and architecture. But it depends on how you read it. Where are your eyes? What is your methodology when you read? And if you're a political scientist and you are busy with the questions of politics, of legitimacy and definition of power structures and states and so forth, and you are reading the Quran with these eyes of the political scientist, you are going to come up with theories of political science that could perhaps, provide solutions for problems of today's state. If you are a psychologist, you're not considered a scholar, according to many of our scholars. But if you are a Muslim psychologist and you read in the Quran about the nafs and how it's healthy and how it is basically sick, you are going to come from a different worldview from all the schools of psychology. One of them is the Freudian worldview, puts pleasure at the foundation of the human motivation, and the cognitive school of psychology that deals with the development of the cognitive tools and the cognitive abilities and so on, and therefore understands the human in terms of the cognitive theories. And the Darwinian worldview in psychology that looks at you in terms of the chemistry, the genetics and the proteins. That's the human. And therefore psychology is just give the medicine so that the nerves do this and that. Or what was that again? The other school of psychology, the Maslow, the behavioral school of psychology, according to the Maslow hierarchy. So whether you are Maslowian or Darwinian or Freudian or cognitive science, this is all not Islamic. And as a psychologist, you have to be able to critique all of these people if you're going to read the Quran in a different way. Because when you read the Quran from your point of view as a Muslim, you're going to reorient your worldview in a way that gives you a different worldview. The components of this is the source of knowledge, that the basic source of knowledge is the Quran, and then the basic logic, we talked about that in terms of connectivity and purposefulness, conceptualization, in terms of the definition. Let's take one example, the heart, for example, al-qalb. Al-qalb is a major part of the nafs, of who you are. Nafs is the self, we translate it as a soul, but the nafs is yourself. What is a heart? Today, medicine will tell you that the heart is a muscle. The heart, but in Islam, the heart is not just a muscle. Yes, in Islam, the heart is in the chest. ولكن تعمل القلوب التي في الصدور. Heart is in the chest, the Quran says. But the heart is not just a muscle. The heart is the place of memory. We have a memory point here. I understand that. But this is not where this is a tool that helps the memory. But the memory is here, not here. That is the Islamic paradigm. The other paradigm says that no, this is the memory, and this is just a pump. And that's different. The heart is the way you see. ولكن تعمل قلوب إنها لا تعمل أبصار ولكن تعمل قلوب التي في الصدور. The eyes do not go blind, the Quran says, but the heart does. So when somebody is blind in Islam, you're supposed to be calling his heart blind. But if his eye is blind, yes, that's a disability, but that's not blind. You're not supposed to call him blind. Or believe that he is really blind. Yes, the Sahabi, Abdullah ibn Maktoum, was blind. But the Quran is telling us that this is blindness and this is blindness, but the real blindness is the blindness of the heart. That's a different part. So when you are a psychologist, you look at the heart in terms of blindness and memory and awareness, and then you have a different fundamental of your psychology, different from somebody who is going to look Freudian at your childhood and so on, the complexes, or is going to look at you in a Darwinian way. Therefore, you are just chemistry that evolved over millions of years, and you were, that's different. So these conceptualizations are very important in order for us to assess the reality, past, present, and future. And we cannot really understand the reality without a tasawwur, without a worldview. That tasawwur will make us redefine, I mentioned here as a subtitle, redefining Islamic history, assessing lived reality, and envisioning the future. And finally, scholarship is about a different scope, scholars, and outcomes. The scope of scholarship in this methodology and in Islam proper is not just jurisprudence. The scope of scholarship is every science. People from any background could do Islamic studies if they want to come from an Islamic approach. So they could come to this institute, for example, and they have a background in psychology. That is fine. And they write a master's on Islam from a psychological lens, from a psychological perspective. There is nothing wrong with that from the Islamic methodology point of view. We cannot tell them, no, you have to be a clergy. Yes, they could be a clergy and come here and study hadith or tafsir or one of them. That is also fine. But they could be an architect, and they come here and do a master's in Islamic architecture or a PhD. But what is Islamic architecture? Is it just the domes and the minarets and so on? No, Islamic architecture is this room, but in a different way, because these architectures are based on the French Renaissance. The French Renaissance gave us a theory of vacuums, and vacuums are just going by efficiency of space. They don't consider the purpose of the building. There is a difference between the French Renaissance and the theory of architecture and Islamic theory of architecture. That will be a very different story. So that's the scope. And the objective or the outcomes will be basically the usul or the theories that govern these things. I have in chapter 4 and 5 and 6 on the methodology and what's called the framework and so on. I leave this for tomorrow, in addition to some of the discussions that my brothers asked me to do with the personal law. So inshallah, I could continue a little bit more in the methodology. We have here 5 steps that we take our researchers through in order to come up with a new idea. Purpose, reflections on the Quran and Sunnah, framework, critical studies and formative theories. And then we have 7 elements: concepts, proofs, groups, universal laws, commands, values, objectives, And based on that, we approach knowledge in a different way. I could go more into detail tomorrow in that, in terms of the classification of knowledge and how you write research on a thesis. And again, this is not just an intellectual exercise. This is meant to be applied, meant for Islam to contribute. Well, and inshallah, one of the contributions, perhaps if I have time tomorrow, and I will inshallah prepare something about the personal law. So this is my specialization. I'm not specialized. Here it is, alhamdulillah. I'm not specialized in any of the other branches of knowledge. I studied cognitive science. I did actually a PhD in systems, cognitive systems. But that was a long time ago. I don't have this as specialization. So I will speak about fiqh in the legal sense, because that's my specialization, not because that's Islam. I will do that tomorrow, inshallah, with family law. Well, Jazakallah khair for your patience. I know that it's the end of the day and it is some heavy talk, but I believe that inshallah it is needed. Well, Jazakallah khair again for inviting us. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alden. That was a very expanding horizon for understanding the approach of the knowledge. There are some other questions from the audience. This Makaray and then Kanji. How about those from the online?
Now, my question may be a bit of the topic, or I'm just looking at it from a different point of view. I was really struck when you say that a Islamic medical person may look at the organs of a person in a different manner than those who learn medical schools in the secular world. Is that correct?
Yep.
I wonder then if the Muslim doctor who learned his medicine from, I don't know, there is a medical Islamic schools training doctors. We're talking about the heart. And you were saying that the heart, look, maybe physically it looks the same to both doctors, but it is conceptualized in different manners. That's correct. So if the Muslim doctor look at the heart and look at it in a different manner, will the medicine that he will eventually use to cure what's wrong with the heart be as effective or be as effective as the medicine that would be given by the secular doctor? If such is the case, I wonder if all the medical doctors who are Muslims are actually aware of the different perceptions. So I'm a bit confused.
In today's language, they call this usually the psychological side of heart disease. So they say that there is a link between the psychology of the person and the condition of their heart. And therefore, if they are afraid, the brain will pump more hormones in the blood, and therefore the heart will feel that the person is afraid. The Muslim doctor will have a different view, because we believe that the heart responds to the reality, not necessarily through the hormone. Hormones are the cause and effect. But the heart, when you comprehend the reality, might shake. إنما المؤمنون الذين إذا ذكر الله وجلت, Allah said in Surah Al-Anfal, that the believers are people, when Allah is mentioned, their heart trembles, their heart changes. It's not necessarily because of hormones or any of that. but it's because their heart is in a different place. Your question is, will this medicine be as effective? It depends on how you define effective. What is the purpose of medicine? The purpose is to heal the person from sickness to health. How do you define sickness and health? Of course, something wrong with a muscle of the heart or the valve is sickness, but that's not the only sickness. And in fact, that is a basic sickness that perhaps at higher levels of the heart, if your psychology is fine, you might be able to heal your heart. You might be able to have a stronger heart, not necessarily because you are training your heart muscles, but because your psychology, to speak in English, is good, and therefore your heart is healthy. There are sicknesses that heal, and people don't know why it heals in Western medicine. And they have this phenomenon that somebody has the cancer, and then the cancer shrinks and goes away. And they say, we don't know what. And they say, well, this is the psychological part of that. Or somebody has a scar on their heart and it disappeared. And the way they interpret these things so far is whether through the genetics, that the person has strong genetics, and therefore they were able to heal the arthritis, or they are less prone to having diabetes, and that's how the diabetes is treated until it disappears. But I believe that Islamic medicine, I'm not a specialist, but people who are into Islam should be able to give us reasons why we could actually heal arthritis or heal cancer from an Islamic point of view. We have not researched that yet, but there are healings that Western medicine so far puts it in the square of psychology or psychological impact or something, and that's why this person actually healed from cancer, because she got this proposal for marriage or whatever, and her psychology became very good, and she was actually able to stand on her feet. But in Islam, I believe we have a paradigm that we have not explored yet, given these diseases, that they were not in the past. So how effective? Well, it will depend on how we define that. And it doesn't mean, by the way, that if you have an Islamic approach to medicine, that the material approach that we have in Western medicine is obsolete or is not Islamic. It's also Islamic. And Western medicine had achieved fantastic results. But they are limited, I believe. They are within a limited brackets. And I believe the holistic approach of Islam could even improve on Western medicine. When you combine Western medicine with holistic medicine, you are a better doctor. And I've seen it like throughout my dealing with doctors. The person who's just specialized is not as good as somebody who talks to you about your nutrition and perhaps advises you if you have psychological problems to seek counseling. This kind of doctor who believes in the holistic approach. And yes, you have a problem with your heart, but he's telling you, don't see a counselor because maybe when you resolve your problems, you will have less stress on your heart. That is holistic. In Islam, I believe, is more holistic. And there is hope for a major breakthrough if we as Muslims give some attention to this area.
Is there any way or are medical Muslim in the medical working towards that area that you're talking about, or this is just some assumption that it might work, but it might not. But there is really no strong development towards that kind of idea that you're talking about.
Well, I'm not aware of development in terms of medicine for the body, but I'm aware of development in terms of psychology. In terms of psychology, Dr. Zaid mentioned this network of psychologists. And we have something, I've seen something similar in Canada in terms of counseling offices in different other parts. There is research coming out more and more about the success of Islamic counseling or Islamic psychiatrists who take an Islamic approach to heal sicknesses in a particular way. So in terms of psychology, there is literature. And in the network of psychologists, I'm aware of the number of offices, and some of them that I've seen in Canada, I'm not been part of that, but they have success. They can deal with people who are Muslim in a better way than somebody coming from a different perspective, and therefore doesn't understand the Islamic mentality and the Islamic approach to that's psychology. But the other parts of medicine, I'm not aware. I'm aware, for example, of the healing with fasting. That, like especially in the Arab world, we have certain clinics in Egypt, in Syria, Iraq, where you go and they heal you with fasting. They make you fast, and then you break your fast only on water, for example, and you go like that for a number of weeks, and then there are successes of that because they are able to heal things like headaches, things like chronic in the body. I'm aware, but I'm not aware of particular research as I'm referring to. I'm sure if somebody else knows, they can tell you.
Assalamu alaikum. And I really appreciate and admire your lecture. And actually, I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to ask only one because it might take a lot of time. So, what I understood,
Give me my card, inshallah. We can continue by WhatsApp.
inshallah, I actually like the part of causality and theology. So, what I noticed is that causality or asbab, they can be theories that human beings can come up with. And teleology is purposeful, which is that's where the ilm is. So it has no development, it's fixed because it is in the Quran. So there are many ideas, many theories. So what if, for example, we have Western philosophy and theories, and I recall Hegel's ideas of the idea of dialectic. And you mentioned earlier War and Peace. And one of the purpose of why War and Peace is happening is because of something like the renewal society, and that is somehow similar to Hegel's idea of dialectic. And he used war as an example to explain this dialectic, which is which is a way of history to unfold and develop. So, can we use these secular theories in explaining ilm in the Quran?
I believe if you are going to talk about Hegel, you have to be able to critique it. Yes, of course, you can benefit from his philosophy, but you have to be able to critique him in terms of what he's talking about from the Quran. So I believe that two sunan of Allah that are mentioned in the Quran have a lot to do with the Hegelian approach to the war issue and the flow of history, what we call it, or this movement of history. In terms of التدافع ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم بعض. This is people pushing and التداول وتلك الأيام نداولها بين الناس. The days are going to be cycled amongst the people. I believe that if you look at التداول والتدافع in the Quran and try to come up with a comprehensive way, not just the word دفع تدافع دفاع, not just that, and not just دال يدول دولة, but the meaning of it, the meaning of التداول. Every story of every prophet has تدافع and تداول. And the story of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on top of this, has تدافع and تداول. And when you look at the hereafter in the Quran, you will see the rest of the picture, etc. So if you form a picture of the death or the devil, and then read Hegel, you will be able to critique it. Because anybody who comes from a non-Islamic perspective is critiquable from the Islamic perspective. If he is extensive like Hegel as a philosopher. What in his philosophy that is compatible with Islam and what in his philosophy is not? And it should not be the other way around. You should not do Islamic philosophy. Islamic philosophy based on it. You should do Islamic philosophy based on the Quran. And whoever studied the Quran from the Muslim philosophy, if they are true to the Quran, and then critique the other person. I have seen people who want to write theses on Islamic sociology. And they come from a Durkheimian worldview. Like they study Durkheim and they're very happy with him. And then they come and they want to apply Durkheim on a Muslim community and they call this Islamic study. And no, this is not Islamic study. This is Durkheimian approach applied to Muslims living in Manila. But that's different from critiquing Durkheim. For example, his categorization of people based on their self-manifestation, based on the Islam doesn't do categorizations. Islam does not categorize people based on their self-identification, because this ended up with what we have today. People self-identify as anything, as a wolf, as a cat, a man, a woman, anything. No, but Islam, there is a natural categorization of things based on Allah's creation. And based on that, we can critique him and not make him the. I have seen students who try to write a thesis of justice or social justice based on role. But yeah, and that I tell them all the time, like that, okay, you have to be able to critique roles and not write about justice, but not come from a Rosen perspective and deal with justice in the Quran and try to find roles in the Quran. Because that's exactly what we call apologetic. I advise you to read that section that Humphrey wrote on apologism, because it will have some of this.
Follow-up question. So, in this kind of, let's say, thinking, can we refer to this as we will critique an idea, a secular idea based on Islamic principles, Quran and Sunnah. So, and then try to bring that to the Islamic viewpoint. So, can we refer to that as the Islamization of knowledge, or is it similar to the popular movement in Malaysia?
Well, no, there are differences between this approach and the Islamization of knowledge approach. Of course, it is influenced by the Islamization of knowledge, and especially the last development of it that has to do with the integration of knowledge. But you can see that this is not dini wa madani. This is not aqli and naqli. This I don't classify this way in my writings. And people who are taking a maqasid approach in general, they don't necessarily define al-aqli wa naqli this way. I wrote about that in chapter 6 in the book you have, that al-aqli wa naqli, according to Ibn Khaldun, did not mean for al-aqli to be secular and al-naqli to be historical. And that's basically more or less how the Islamization worked, in terms of al-naqli being about schools of our history, not necessarily the Quran and Sunnah, and al-aqli being a secular thing. So if you want to do aqli and naqli in medicine, you get your medicine degree from the UK, and then you get your naqli knowledge by studying the Shafi'i madhab, and then somehow you are supposed to come up with an Islamization. And that's why there are some very good ideas that were generated from that. But this approach is fundamentally different, and it centralizes the maqasid. So we can call it the maqasid approach. And it's not just mine, it's actually there are a number of people that would contribute to a maqasid approach in a number of ways. And so there's that difference. The latest of the Islamization project was what they call integration of knowledge. And the integration of knowledge version of the Islamization is very similar to that, because it centralized the Quran. That is what I noticed about people who are promoting the integration of knowledge. And they also had a special interest in the maqasid of the Quran. For instance, Shaitan Alwan, his the latest of his production, his life, rahmahullah, was on the maqasid of the Quran. And he started towards the end to try to activate maqasid of the Quran in his fiqh, his own fiqh, and his own approach to Islamic thought. So that is fun. But this is not the Islamization school. Your graduate of the Islamization University, I don't know. So, thank you. No further.
Thank you very much, Dr. Albert. I think your presentation on the reorienting study worldview coheres with that of the call of Engineer Osama in terms of scholars to be brave, or the reformers to be brave. The implications of promoting policing or comprehensiveness of knowledge is that it would require, say, a student or individual to be able to reflect that of the qualifications of scholars in the golden age, when they were not identified in terms of their specialization. For instance, a single scholar can be a judge, can be a philosopher, can be a medical doctor, can be a scientist, can be astronomer, can be a mathematician. In other words, the manner of knowledge or the structure of knowledge production in those times so distinct from that of our time, where there is at the very base or foundation of which fragmentation starts. For instance, when a student would start his elementary, high school, and say college education, then he would take another how many years for him, say, for instance, to want to be a doctor. By the time he probably would be around 30 plus years old. Now, when he aspires to become a qadi or a judge, you could just imagine how many more courses he would take. More so if he would become an astronomer or a scientist or in other words, the structure of knowledge productions in our time is contradictory to the ideals of the worldview reorientation that we espouse. Unless and until we are ready to deconstruct the system and reflect to that of what was then initiated during the golden age of Islam. But people might think it's quite classical, it's quite illegal. But unless we do that, we probably be too utopian to just say we want to, reorient our world. Or probably some maybe critique us as too chaotic, if not impractical. In other words, this call for reorientation of Islamic world requires the restructuring of our knowledge production. Now, are we brave enough to move into that domain of getting out of the system and come up with, a tradition that is, distinctly Islamic at certain point? For instance, you're very much aware of the likes of, Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, who did not attend a university like in our time, but was able to produce volumes of treatises on practically all areas thought. You mentioned Ibn Khaldun. His university was at the where the action was. You know, but when he decided to write, he simply retreated to a place for quite a few months, and he was able to come up with this, who's similar with possibly in our time. Maybe the closest I could think of is Badiuzzzaman Sayyid. He also did not, undergo his rigid studies going to the university. But if we look at the product of Sayyid Nursi's thought, it's almost incomparable in our time. So, in other words, great minds that who are actually able to, push the worldview that we espouse are probably very few. In fact, they did not, join they were unconventional as far as knowledge production is concerned. I don't know if this call for a reorientation is something that is also acceptable to say educational system, because if we really want to become comprehensive, then we should not await existing traditions or methodologies in conventional education.
It's a very important question, and that's why I wrote a whole chapter, which is chapter 6, to talk about it, inshallah, that has to do with reorientation of the current scholarship. Basically, the current division of knowledge into humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, and applied science is not the right division, as you rightly said, for this Islamic approach that is comprehensive, because we cannot really be under theology and then we study psychology and architecture and philosophy and so on. This is theology. The way to do it, I mentioned in that chapter, within the system, is to go from disciplinarity to multidisciplinarity, and then to take a phenomena-based research. And the phenomena-based research or the applied research is going to take you out from disciplinarity and multidisciplinarity, and is going to move the student into a transdisciplinary approach. So if the student of Islamic studies is studying a phenomenon, depression, for example, as a phenomenon, he or she is not going to study that from a psychological perspective. It's going to define, first of all, from an Islamic perspective, and look at all the other phenomena and disciplines that are tied to depression, or poverty, or tyranny, or violence, and wars, or whatever it is, language, whatever it is that is a phenomenon. I think it's best within the current academia to flip the disciplines into phenomena. And that is possible even within traditional departments. You are in an economics department, and you tell them that you want to study something. Of course, if the supervisor is aware of the paradigm, they will not allow you to go beyond the economic framework from the particular school, or the theological framework, or you want to study political science. They will tell you, no, don't get into arts because this is political science. But if the supervisors and the faculty are open-minded enough, they will allow the study of a revolution, for example, not just under political science, but the revolution has an economic side, an artistic side, psychological side, media, So to move from disciplinary studies to phenomenal studies, which is the circle that we have at this slide. And we have two other circles I'll talk about, inshallah, the usul studies and the strategic studies. relation. So that's how the few top scholars are always a phenomenon. Like there is always phenomena of scholars who are encyclopedic. But that's not what we're trying to train when we train our students. We just train our students to be multidisciplinary or to be phenomena based, not necessarily to be encyclopedic. The journey of being a scholar is really a personal journey that people are crazy about knowledge, like Ibn Khaldun or Ghazali, these people, and then they study, and that is not trained in university. No university gives that. The top universities, the best thing they can do is to give you a PhD on a good thesis, or to give you a professorial rank based on making a difference in a discipline. But what we're talking about, the likes of Ibn Khaldun and Ghazali are beyond the professorial rank, because they are not really just making an impact in a discipline. They are making an impact on knowledge, on like serious human knowledge. And that's different than yes.
One question for the audience here, and then we have two questions from the like,
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I have to say this, Dr. Chesser, that I consider this time that I have spent listening to you as a golden time, mashallah. The opportunity, I wish many others would have listened, have the opportunity to listen to your lecture. This ilan on Maqasid methodology to generate new ideas, very valuable. And but however, it appears to me that it is not for not everyone would have the faculty to apply or to put this into practical use. It appears to me as an untrained in this methodology as something that requires something higher level. So how am I going to use this element? This is my question. If you have a practical tip for me, in particular, how do you compartmentalize causality with the maqasid or the purpose? For example, I understand earlier, even the dean mentioned about the maqasid for marriage, which is mawadda and rahma. I understand that one, and that's the purpose. And as to the causality, you will have to go to the essential requisites of marriage, for example. So those are the costs. So causality of it, and then you have the marriage. Now, perhaps you will touch on this one tomorrow on the topic of methodology, but I may not be around tomorrow. So I would like to take this opportunity for the untrained eye. How do you, and when you were starting this one, or maybe you have a student who asks you for a practical thing, how do you compartmentalize that one so that when a contemporary issue, you're confronted with a contemporary issue, and how are you going to use now this maqasid methodology so that you will already have, okay, this is the causality side, for example, the issue of hijab, and this is the purpose for that one. Thank you very much.
Well, I guess it's a journey that people go through. Well, I will talk tomorrow about 7 elements of perception. The concepts, the objectives, the groups, the values, the universal laws, etc. So how do you do this step by step? Is perhaps to look at the Quran in terms of its objectives and try to shift into an objective style, and then to look at the concepts and words and see what these concepts mean and integrate. To look at the groups and the categorization of parties, to look at the universal laws and speak about them tomorrow, and see how the universal laws are the meta laws of dealing. To look at the values. Each and every one of those is a side of the same thing, of a word, of a kalima, or an area. And practically, how do you project this on the ground? Is basically by trying to map between the framework that you have and the framework as it is on the ground. Like between the concept of marriage, for example, in your mind, and the institution as it is on the ground. And that mapping, you start to see what can we change in order to achieve the objective from what we have on the ground. You map the concept of al-hukm, for example, or governance, with a particular government or municipality, and see how can this municipality be a model of that concept of hukm that we have, and so forth. So therefore, you are able to project a framework on the reality. Does this answer your question, or maybe I didn't understand?
You actually answered my question. It's just that would there be a great like a compilation of the possible, because it would appear to me that you would have to be crowded and learned about all this all this Sharia values of a particular issue for you to apply this capacity.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are different levels of the application. Most of them are partialist. Many levels, you can, students who would like to write a thesis for a bachelor's or even a master's thesis. I usually ask them to combine a few concepts and objectives, try to bring a value to the society. I partialize my work in order for them to be able to do that. Because if I tell them read the Quran and look for these 7 elements and rise above them and come up with a theory, that is a strong PhD. That is not a normal PhD. That is PhD from a major school. And that or some sort of a professorial research. So applying this in full is actually for people who are scholars, established scholars. But people who are training to be scholars or practitioners could partialize and train themselves to this way of thinking. So it's not just it's not all or nothing, because all or nothing, then this would be for very few people. Yet I believe it's important, because at the heart of our intellectual machines as an ummah, we have to produce some general knowledge, but we have not been doing it, except for very few people. I can give you some examples, for example, that I believe go by this methodology. Not because they learned from me, because I learned from them, and they are from the previous generation. For example, Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah Dras, D-R-A-Z, and his book on al-akhlaq for Islam, the moral theory in Islam. His theory is actually going by this methodology at a higher level of knowledge, combining everything in the Quran and coming up with 5 elements that constitute a moral theory. The words of Dr. Mona Abul Fadl, on women and Islam and so on, especially, and of course her work on Islamic civilization. Her comprehension of the Quranic paradigm was very strong, despite her language barriers, actually. And therefore, her paradigm of the civilization, Islamic civilization, and so on, was very strong. And that is a level that is only for scholars. Not so many people know that. But this is an example of that. I believe that the civilization and the anti-civilization, all this movement from Faruqi to Attas to Hussein Nasr now, like these people are at a good level of, I wouldn't say good, excellent level actually, of comprehension of the Quranic paradigm, especially the people who critique the Islamization. Islamization were more into Western philosophy, but people who critique them were more into the Quranic paradigm, like the critique of Khatib al-Attas to the Islamization of Quranic, for example. That is a critique at a higher level of comprehension of the Quranic paradigm and trying to develop a school of Islamic thought this way. So these kinds of people could be at the higher end of this research. But students who research small things, they could, inshallah.
Okay, thank you so much. Can we give the floor to the participants joining online? First is Jasmine and then Rowan. How much?
Thank you, sir. Assalamu alaikum. Am I coming through clear?
You just put the mic over here so you can hear it up there. Sorry.
Assalamu alaikum. Am I coming through clear?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is
Go ahead.
Jasmine. I have 3 questions. Number 1, is there a definitive or systematic approach to operationalizing maqasid methodology that is applicable to all contexts? I take particular notice of the guiding principles or the framework of this methodology, but is there like a clear systematic approach to operationalizing it? And my second question is related to my first question, essentially on the importance of taking into account the context vis-a-vis maqasid methodology. When we talk about maqasid, that's something fundamentally established by Allah, right? Earlier, you talk about the difference between looking at reality in the past and looking at reality
Thank you so much.
in the future. Sorry, am I coming through clear?
The second question.
Yeah, second question. Just for context, because earlier when we talk about maqasid, that's something fundamentally established by Allah, right? Earlier, you talked about the difference between looking at reality in the past and looking at reality or things in the future. And I find it interesting that you did not mention looking at things or realities at present. At any rate, how do we ensure the efficacy or responsiveness of such a methodology in promoting or addressing our societal problems or in knowledge production? And my last question is about the application. Precisely, how do we apply maqasid approach in its entirety, like holistic application? In the book, it is stated that one of the aims of maqasid approach is to avoid limitation or partiality, right? And as Muslims, as much as we want this approach on a macro level, there's always a constraint, like there's always a limitation, like structural constraints. For example, government legislation. So essentially, how do we approach this limitation without necessarily compromising our Islamic values and principles? Thank you.
Thank you. The systematic approach, I think we need to agree on what you mean by systematic. Most people, when they think about systematic, they think in terms of a machine. So they mean by systemization the mechanization of a process, the translation of the process into an algorithm. But I believe that the systemization is not algorithmization, but rather defining elements of a subsystem that forms a system and defining a purpose and then let the system function. I don't know, maybe because I have a specialization in systems theory, an old one. So if you mean by the mechanization of this approach, it's what's coming tomorrow in terms of the steps, because I realized that approaching the presentation in a systems theory way is not going to be comprehensive or comprehended easily. And therefore, I kind of went into an algorithm of 5 steps, and each step has a number of sub-steps, and the framework has 7 elements, and so on. But fundamentally, I don't believe in this. I don't believe in algorithms as a way of systemization, because I believe in living systems. A system is a living entity. It's not a robot. But we kind of translated our systemization into the robotic algorithm. So tomorrow I will give a robotic algorithm for our students, even though I do not believe in that. And I believe that the system is connectivity that emerges. Really, that's in terms of the present and future, yes, there is a section in the book on how to deal with the present. But dealing with the past and the present and the future is going to be in the same way if you're going to speak maqasid, because the maqasid are going to be the objective of the state, for example. And therefore, states in the history are going to be judged based on the objective of the state, and states in the present and states in the future that we aspire to achieve, for example. So past, present, and future are all going to be done in the same way in terms of the methodology. The Quranic concept of time, though, is not our concept. The Quranic concept of time is really funny. It's funny as it's strange. It's different. It's talking about the year after in the past tense, and it's talking about a day with Allah that is like 1,000 years of our time, and then 50,000 to go up in the heavens. And then the Quranic concept of time, if this is your question, is a very interesting concept that requires some study from serious researchers, because it doesn't deal with history the same way. It doesn't give us years, or it doesn't focus on dynasties and stuff. It doesn't do that. It just doesn't even give names, but it deals with history in terms of lessons. Why? Because time with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like time with us. So when we deal with previous, present, and future, we are putting time in our framework. This is not Allah's framework. Allah's framework is different. We can reflect upon. And finally, yes, I agree that there will always be a limitation of the application, and we will always have limitations from the reality. You cannot really come up with a system in the reality, anything, educational, economic, political, without looking at the constraints from the reality. And therefore, we have to operate within the reality. But there is a difference between apologizing for the reality and trying to change the reality. There is a difference between doing Islamic finance, for example, in order to just go around the river, but it's the same river. Or doing Islamic finance, trying to change the river a little bit, to try to push back on the river system and try to make it more risk-taking and more into, even if it's not completely free of riba, but at least we're pushing back. So there is a difference between the hila, or just circumvention and giving in the constraints, versus trying to change the constraints and trying to shape the system by knocking on some of its pivots, like discovering where are the sensitive points in the system, and try to really shape the system through its sensitive points. Wow. There's another question. There is another question?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have another question from Rowena.
Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum, sir. So I have a question about the 5 steps of this methodology, sir. Is this in a particular order, or is this we have to follow the order that you have provided, the Quran, the objective, and so on? Because my question, sir, is which should come first in our mind before we write the thesis? For example, sir, is it the Quran, the Sunnah, or the objective first? If it's the Quran, then the object of the study must be based on the teaching of the Quran or the Sunnah. In this case, the object of study is for Muslim alone. If the objective comes first, then the Quran or the Sunnah would be regarded as sources or resources. The object can be Muslim or non-Muslim. Please kindly give us clarification, sir, because I was really trying to find out, sir, if it's if this step is we have to follow the step, or it could be no particular order, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sister. Well, no, they are not ordered. They are not ordered. Tomorrow, when I explain them, I will start with a purpose and say that purpose is more important than proper definition. And then I'll go to step 2, which is the Quran and Sunnah. And then step 3, building a framework. And then step 4, critical studies. And step 5, theory making. But you really cannot go by the order like that. Because as you read the Quran, you will find yourself redefining your purpose. And the Quran will make you critique something. And the Quran might modify your theory in a particular way. When you do critical studies of, as we mentioned, Freud or Darwin or any of that, in the middle of your critical studies, you might say, okay, let me go back to the Quran and see what it says about history or whatever. Or let me, there's maybe a hadith that dealt with something. So really the 5 elements, I have to explain them in sequence, because in our limited human minds, we have to go by a sequence. We read the Quran in sequence. We start with Islam all the way to Min al-Jinnati wal-Nas. But the Quran is not just the list of the ayat. The Quran is all interconnected, and everything is tying to each other. So if we learn this from the logic of the Quran, we know that the 5 steps that we propose in the institute for our students to follow, they are not really in sequence, because each and every one of them might lead you back with a bridge to another step. Is this for Muslims and non-Muslims? Well, if that non-Muslim believes in the Quran as a source of knowledge and reads the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ looking for knowledge, of course they can do that. I mean, if a non-Muslim really takes the Islamic worldview as their worldview, they can follow the algorithm and the steps, and they can contribute to that. Otherwise, I believe non-Muslims could research this from the outside, like as a social study or philosophical study, not as seeking truth in the Quran. Because what we try to do is to try to find truth from the Quran about psychology, about poverty, about and yes, non-Muslims could find truth in the Quran. But I believe that the Quran is not going to open its meanings except for people who believe in it. Even if they don't announce that Islam, but at least they believe that it's a source of knowledge that is correct. ذلك كتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. It's a guidance for those who are taqwa. نزلنا عليك تبين وهدى وبشرى للمؤمنين. It's for the believers, for المتقين. But people who are seeking knowledge from the Quran, you will be surprised about how many non-Muslims who find truth in the Quran. I see them everywhere. Some people who read the Quran find truth. They might have some psychological problems or a family issue or a political issue or something that they want to declare Islam. But many people who are non-Muslims or interested in the Quran believe in the Quran and benefit and learn from it. And that's why the Quran is here. It's not just for Muslims. The Quran is for non-Muslims too, to read, first of all, to believe. That's the first objective, so that they save themselves in the afterlife. But they don't save themselves in the afterlife, well, they can still learn about family from the Quranic paradigm. Because family, according to the Quran, including everything, including the polygamy and the inheritance, you name it, is better than family, not according to the Quran. We believe in that. Economy, according to the Quran, without riba, is better than economy. Even if you're not Muslim, you could believe in the no riba economy, or you believe in the no zina society, or the no So also, for humanity too. So the hikmah or the wisdom is also for humanity. But this kind of exercise requires a Muslim scholar, requires somebody who really is a believer. Allah.
One last question from Sister Debat, and then we conclude our session.
Thank you for giving this opportunity, and I would like to say, thank you also say about what I learned from you. And Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, you are dealing about, talking about holistic approach in healing or solving problems. Now, when it comes to healing, I have written an article with a titled The Holistic Healing. I did not spell it with HOLISTIC, holistic, but I spell it WHOLISTIC, holistic, which is the word whole, complete healing. So there are 5 aspects in man that must be good or must be healed. Doctors have different specialization. We have the first eyes, the heart, and the rest of the body. I will only mention 5 aspects man that must be good. That are intellectual, emotional, on the heart, spiritual, it's about the soul, and the physical body, about our body here. Are you healthy or are you malnourished? So it's like it. And the last one is environment. If these aspects of man are good, that gives a complete healing. So what is the disease of the heart? It's not high blood or palpitation and other diseases that the doctors in the hospital heal. But as I said, he knows what is in our shadow, especially the heart. The heart is the center of circulatory system. But that is not all. The heart contains unseen entities. What are these unseen entities that heart has? Like love, like hatred, like compassion, belief, sympathy, so many, tranquility, and self-esteem. They're negative and positive contents on the heart. So I said, that heart needs also healing. And the Quran will tell us how to heal the heart. And another one is the spiritual disease. What is this spiritual disease? The heart needs something to console it, to make it happy. How do we become happy? By obeying, observing religious obligation. When we perform religious obligations, we become like fulfilled and we're happy. We're contented. Like we pray, we salah, we fast, we obey His will. We're happy. The soul is that is we are healing our spiritual side. And what about the intellectual side? The mind is a container, actually. It's not a basket, but it contains what? Knowledge. But maybe your mind contains false knowledge. It also contains trust or truthful knowledge. So in order to heal your mind, you have to remove that falsehood or wrong knowledge. Let's say in the Quran that in the hearts is a marat or disease. And Allah complicates this disease because they used to tell lies. So why telling lies became a form of sickness? Because In the first place, we were assigned as Khalifa of Allah. And Khalifa's mission is to promote truth and justice. What happened? How can you how can you manage to be a leader, a Khalifa, if you are we're talking this is about intellectually by being by promoting falsehood. So how can you be a good Khalifa if you are not truthful? So in that way you are intellectually on account of intellectual, you are sick. So can you be a Khalifa if you are sick in the mind?
We have questions.
Oh, not yet. Okay, that's already three aspects. The fourth one is the physical body. We feed ourselves, our body, with nutritious food and halal food. So we become strong and keep going without food and water, because our cells need what? We need nutritious food, clean air, oxygen, and pure clean water only. That's all. By giving our body with these nutrients, water, clean oxygen, we do not have any side effects in treating our physical body. And the fifth one is the environment. If we have without environment, we cannot survive.
Or maybe you can share us for article for us to learn more about.
Yes, if you can allow me tomorrow to discuss one topic.
Maybe you can share it.
Yes,
Printed.
I am only telling you some expert, but this is all I can say for the moment because we are running out of time, and I'm very happy that you're giving me this opportunity to express it, to impart knowledge from Allah. Thank you, sir. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much. Maybe one day we can invite you to share your insights about what we read.
Very interesting, very holistic with the W. You notice that I can learn all different W's.
So, since it was not a question, I believe that doesn't need any response from our speaker. Thank you so much, Dr. Albert. It was a very lengthy and enlightening discussions on the methodology of Pakasi. Although we still have to hear from you tomorrow, but the staff already handed the certificate. So we'll just present this tomorrow. Thank you so much for those who came and shared their thoughts and questions, and thank you also for our speakers. One at a time. Our tools, distinguished speakers. So tomorrow we will resume our workshop 8:30. And before we dismiss, we have a photo
For day one.
for day one.
For day one.
Thanks so much.
Oh.
Thank you very much. So this book is so strong that we will get to if you are prescribed and I don't know how to take a Kaya na, sabi niya yun tatangsin nila na ta. Yun sa babae din. Sila it's time to say it. I've missed what sorry. It's natin. What is the reason why like learning area? I don't think I should enjoy cover. Papa, yun ba? Tapos ikapi na lang ganyan. Kaya yun, ay wala na. Okay. Wait lang. Wala. Wait lang ha.
Or the very should get very visible in the only thing that's the Christmas and see what the
Ma. Yun. Kenen.
the thing in there. Yeah. I will need one. One month. One. One, two.
May pa-workshop sila bukas.
Sir, sir, sayang